Renaming the Gulf of Mexico? It sounds like a plot from a political satire, but it's actually President-elect Trump's latest headline-grabbing move. Today, we're diving into how a simple name change could spark an international incident.
Wait, what? Trump wants to rename the Gulf of Mexico? I must have missed that news alert. What's the story here?
Well, it's a doozy. During a press conference at his Mar-a-Lago residence, Trump announced his plan to change the Gulf of Mexico's name to the Gulf of America. He called it beautiful and appropriate, citing concerns over illegal immigration from Mexico.
That's certainly a bold move. But how does renaming a body of water address immigration issues?
That's the million-dollar question. Trump's framing this as a symbolic gesture, but it's really part of a larger, more aggressive stance on immigration. He described Mexico as a very dangerous place that's run by the cartels and threatened economic consequences over the border crisis.
Oh, so it's not just about the name change. There are economic implications too?
Exactly. Trump's threatening to impose 25% tariffs on all products from Mexico and Canada unless their governments meet his demands. It's a high-stakes game he's playing, potentially impacting two of our largest trading partners.
Wait, Canada? How did they get pulled into this? Last time I checked, we weren't facing a crisis of maple syrup smuggling.
Well, it seems Trump is taking a hardline stance on immigration from all directions. But you're right, it's a bit of a head-scratcher. What's really interesting is how quickly this is moving from an off-the-cuff remark to potential legislation.
You mean someone's actually trying to make this happen? Who would… Oh, let me guess. Marjorie Taylor Greene?
Bingo! Greene announced on Benny Johnson's program that she's prepared to introduce legislation to change the Gulf's name. She seemed pretty fired up about it, saying she directed her legislative staff to draft the bill immediately.
Wow. Has anyone considered the logistical nightmare this would create? We're talking about changing maps, updating military and FAA documents, not to mention the international implications.
Exactly. It's not like changing the name of your local coffee shop. This is a body of water that's been known as the Gulf of Mexico for centuries. And let's not forget the diplomatic repercussions. We're essentially erasing another country's name from an international body of water. That's bound to cause some tension.
No kidding. So, how are Mexico and Canada responding to all this?
Well, former Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau and Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum Pardo have already held meetings with Trump to discuss the matter. Canada's even preparing for potential fallout by strengthening its immigration enforcement, hiring more staff, and adding resources.
That sounds like they're taking these threats seriously. But let's take a step back for a moment. What do you think this says about Trump's approach to foreign policy and immigration?
Well, it's certainly a continuation of his America First policy from his previous term. He's taking a very aggressive stance, using both symbolic gestures like the name change and economic threats to push his agenda. It's classic Trump, bold, controversial, and guaranteed to dominate the news cycle.
Right. And it's likely to resonate with his base. For many of his supporters, these kinds of bold moves are exactly what they're looking for. It's a clear, simple message. We're putting America first, even if it means ruffling some international feathers.
Exactly. But on the flip side, this could potentially alienate moderates and certainly won't win him any favors with those who prioritize international cooperation and diplomacy. And let's not forget the potential economic impact. Imposing tariffs on Canada and Mexico could have significant repercussions for American businesses and consumers.
It's a high-stakes game he's playing. But I suppose that's nothing new for Trump. He's always been one to make big, bold moves and deal with the consequences later. I'm curious to see how this will play out on the international stage.
You and me both. And here's another thing to consider: the precedent this could set. If we start renaming international bodies of water based on current political climates, where does it end? Could we see other countries following suit?
Oh man, I hadn't even thought of that. Can you imagine if every country started renaming geographical features to make political statements? We'd need to update our maps every week.
Exactly. And speaking of updates, let's bring it back to the domestic front for a moment. How do you think this will play out in Congress? With Marjorie Taylor Greene already drafting legislation, it's clear there's some support for this in certain Republican circles. But I imagine it would face significant opposition, not just from Democrats, but also from more moderate Republicans.
You're right about that. And even if it did pass through Congress, there's the question of implementation. We're talking about a massive undertaking in terms of updating maps, documents, and systems across multiple government agencies. Not to mention the cost. In a time when there are so many pressing issues facing the country, from healthcare to education to infrastructure, is this really where we want to be allocating resources?
That's a great question. It really comes down to priorities. Is renaming the Gulf of Mexico going to address the root causes of illegal immigration or improve border security? Probably not. But it does send a message, which seems to be Trump's main goal here.
So true. And it's not just about the message to Mexico. This move also sends a strong signal to Trump's base that he's serious about his campaign promises. It's a way of saying, see? I'm doing exactly what I said I would do.
Absolutely. And that's something we've seen consistently from Trump throughout his political career. He's not afraid to make bold, controversial moves that grab headlines and energize his supporters. But as we've discussed, these moves often come with significant potential consequences, both domestically and internationally.
Right? Well, that's what makes this story so fascinating. It's not just about a name change or even about immigration policy. It's about how we approach complex international issues in an increasingly interconnected world. Do we opt for diplomacy and nuanced solutions, or do we go for bold, headline-grabbing moves?
Exactly. And in this case, Trump seems to be firmly in the latter camp. It's an approach that's certainly gotten him attention, but whether it will lead to effective policy changes remains to be seen. As we wrap up, I can't help but wonder what the long-term implications of this could be, both domestically and internationally.
Those are excellent questions, and I think only time will tell. But one thing's for sure. This story is far from over. We'll be keeping a close eye on how this develops in the coming weeks and months.
Absolutely. And that's all we have time for today. Thanks for joining us as we explored this latest development in the ever-evolving political landscape of America. Until next time, keep questioning, keep thinking, and keep listening.
And remember, whether it's the Gulf of Mexico or the Gulf of America, the waters are still blue and the issues are rarely black and white. Good night, everyone.